Greetings, comrades, and welcome to Brett's Horror Vlog. This is the show where I pretty much just talk about several things I've either watched, listened to, experienced, and kind of give mini reviews all in one. I'm wearing a jack-o'-lantern shirt that clearly is 2 sizes smaller than the normal size I wear for some reason. And I got my Hello Kitty little spooky skeleton friend here to keep me company. And today, covering a couple of things. First thing is Megan. Watched that recently with Kelly, and Megan is a pleasant surprise, I would say. It's one of those movies, when I first saw ads for it, I was like, this looks absolutely awful. But I liked how self-aware it was and how actually funny the movie is. And there's a lot of really smart commentary on just artificial intelligence, and especially kids' toys. And I got definite Furby vibes. It was like they were almost comparing this to a Furby, the whole project of Megan. And if you haven't seen Megan, I definitely suggest it. Even if you aren't a horror fan, there's enough to appreciate that there's not blood in it or anything. There's just enough that it's not going to spook you really, and it's not scary whatsoever, at least to me. It's just a doll that's artificial intelligence. It learns to do things on its own. It's way ahead of its time, and really smart and continuing to pick up on things. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting. So yeah, Megan is quite a smart surprise, and yeah, a lot of the stuff it had to say was pretty funny. And yeah, I definitely was just I was just thinking back in the 90s, when I had a Furby, was that was the thing that blew people's minds. And this was kind of just a doll version of that, where it was Furbies had the whole its own language, and then it developed to learn English, a lot, maybe 5 to a week in. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. It made me think of my Furby a long time ago. But yeah, Megan was a lot of fun. The kills aren't anything to write home about. It's more you're watching this for what's Megan going to do, how's she going to put the aunt and the one niece in danger and everything. And yeah, I thought it was really well done. And it has a typical horror cliche type ending, but the thing is, yeah, it's PG-13, so most people can watch this, even if you're at a young age and things scare you or spook you pretty easily, or you can't handle blood. This is an easy watch. And I know there is an unrated cut on Peacock, but I didn't watch that. I just watched the theatrical cut. I mean, I don't know, really, the unrated type gimmick can be really misleading. Some of those PG-13 comedies, they'll put it out on DVD or whatever, and then they say, oh, this is the unrated cut. And it's I mean, is it really that big of a deal? Or did they add a lot more profanity or a lot more things that are inappropriate to it? You don't know. But I mean, if you've seen the Megan unrated cut and know the difference between the two, if it's bloodier or a lot more graphic, then it's a possibility. But to me, just because something says it's unrated, that doesn't necessarily attract me to it, especially if it's something how Megan, to me, this movie came off as a PG-13 horror film. So, and I know some horror purists are what, PG-13 horror is terrible. But anyway, that's just me. But I enjoyed Megan, and I think most people who get spooked easily but want a good just thriller will probably enjoy Megan. Next up is, if you've watched my last horror vlog, I was talking about how Kelly and I were watching the final season of Servant, and so we did finish up with that. And the show, I would say a lot of people are going to have criticisms about this show. I mean, the biggest criticism I've always heard about this show is just it's so slow in its pacing, where you're come on, just go, move a little faster. And I can understand that, but how Kelly and I, when we watch stuff, we do like stuff that's a slow burn. We don't like a ton of noise and like just a lot of commotion going on. And this season, the final season, I would just say, in my last video I had mentioned, I was like, the first episode is just a CGI fest of like terrible, like just terrible CGI. But like the rest of the season we were enjoying. And as far as my opinion goes for the rest of the season, of the episodes that we now have watched that we didn't see at the time I recorded my last video, I enjoyed the final season overall. And a lot of people are going to have a lot of issues with the way that this show ends. And because I had mentioned this a little bit in my last video, but this show really doesn't give you a lot of answers to things or why things are the way they are, with the character of Leanne, of how she is the maid for the household and takes care of their baby, who, you know, if you know the premise of the show, it's the beginning of the show, it's like they had a baby and it died. And so to help with the wife, Dorothy, with her grief, they got this doll that looks like a baby, and they still carried on their life, you know, with, you know, the husband, you know, they're carrying on their life just like they had a baby still, but with this doll. And so they hired this maid to come into their house and pretend as well that, you know, their son Jericho, you know, is still alive and this doll is really him. And then of course, you know, that ends up being the doll ends up being Jericho, and like it's a real boy. So most of the show going throughout, you're like, is this a supernatural thing, or is it just someone who is mentally ill? And did Leanne just like snatch a baby up from the street? And I like that earlier in the first season of the show, like they kind of established like they were looking up, you know, missing children and everything, and like they didn't see any sort of reports around the area about it. And I'm glad it had that awareness to it. And with this final season, it's like you're wondering like, how can this show stretch out to 4 seasons? And it's like, due to the pacing, and like each episode's only like just short of half an hour, yeah, it's going to have slow pacing because the fact it's now on a 4th season. And the 4th season, towards the end of it, is to where, you know, Dorothy, her as a character, she still cannot come to gripes with what had happened or what she did to Jericho when he had passed. And it was due to her having postpartum depression, and she just basically left him in the vehicle, her vehicle, and, you know, she was just gone mentally. Like when, you know, the cops were called and they were going over everything with her. And like, this is very much a horror show. Like like my wife, you know, we were just at the hospital, you know, having our baby daughter, and now having our baby daughter. It's like, maybe this isn't the best show to watch for us, but we can kind of handle stuff like that. And we're the type of people, it's like we could watch Titanic and then immediately go on a cruise the next day and be fine. Like we're not like superstitious in that way. But yeah, like this is, you know, the horror of this. It's like it can hit very close to home for some people. You know, anyone who's dealt with a miscarriage or anything to do with like a tragedy in a family or having to do with baby, like this show, yeah, can really hit you. And especially in the final season, like the last couple episodes, I think it's the episode before the final episode that Dorothy finally remembers what she had done to Jericho, their baby boy, and she just loses it, completely loses it. And, you know, it's a nice thing that I really liked how the show finally came to gripes with of facing those problems of, you know, finally dealing with your grief, and rather than just pretending that, you know, they had this, you know, element of where they're baby came back to life, where you're like, it looks exactly like Jericho of how they remember, and they're like, how did this happen? And if Leanne like really does have these magical powers, and to me at least my theory was she had these powers to be able to do some incredible things. And then that's why in like season 3 and 4 she had this big following of a lot of people who were on the streets and believed in her, and were taking care of Jericho. And the thing is, it's like there's just so much mystery surrounding those little things. You're only given these little tidbits where I'm just like, you're just so in the unknown. But for me, it's like I'm there for the ride. Like, I'm there to enjoy the ride of it. And leading that out to the end of the show with how things happen and how things unfold and wrap up, you're not given clear answers, and the show really does not get wrapped up in a neat bow. There's still so many questions involved. And at least with this show, if this show only lasted one season, the way season 1 ends is like a great horror movie ending. And I said this in my previous horror vlog video, and you're like wondering like, all right, where does season 2 go from here? And season 2 ends on a cliffhanger, and then season 3 comes around, and season 3 ends on like a really big moment that involves Dorothy. And then season 4, that's the final season. It's going to wrap up, but season 4 also has like a good horror movie ending, because it leaves you going like, there is more to this. And knowing it's the last season, you're like, what, like, how, why is that? And I'm not trying to spoil it for those watching this, and I've already spoiled certain parts of the show, but the way the show wraps up, it is a big question mark still. And to me, I really like that, and I already know that there's a lot of complaints about the way the show ended. And at least I can say for me is, you remember the shows that end on a terrible note, or they end with not a lot of questions answered. And to me, that's what makes me enjoy this ending, is because you just don't know. Like I've said before, I'm a huge fan of the show Twin Peaks. That show, you have no idea, to a lot of questions are never answered in that show. But the show is just shrouded in mystery, and that's what keeps you enticed. And David Lynch, who made Twin Peaks, he had said, like, when the original thing of the show was, the tagline of the show is "Who Killed Laura Palmer?" And you do find out who kills Laura Palmer, like in the second season of the show. But once you find that out, there's nothing interesting anymore about the show, really. You're given the main answer to things. And when that happened, when the show originally aired, it's like, after you find out who killed Laura Palmer, you're like, you were done with the show, basically. And so when they brought the show back for a third season in 2017, like, the show had been built up in mystery again, and you're still just like, because once you find out like these clear answers, you're kind of done with it. You're like, all right, I already know, and you're like ready to move on with your life. So when you have, like, I know The Sopranos ended very controversially, and you're like, you don't know like where it was going after that. But it's like, you remember that. For those who watched Lost, a lot of people hated the ending to Lost because you weren't given answers. But that's the thing, it brings you back, that you're like, the show sticks with you because you just don't know. And with Servant, I think that is going to be the case here. And it's like, for better or for worse, for others, whether you hate the ending or you love it, the ending's going to stick with you. And that's, at least for me, why I loved the ending to Servant. And like the show in general, like, I never thought the show got way too off the rails. I know most people, if they watched the whole show, I would say probably season 2 is the worst season, but I still enjoyed season 2. So I will leave it at that with Servant. I recommend Servant. So if you like a good mystery and just knowing that you're not going to get a lot of answers, that's the thing, that's what pulls you in, is just the not knowing and just wanting to see like what does unfold, or making it up to an interpretation of how like, what does this mean? I think it means this. It's like, because there's no wrong answer of what you think it is. So I will leave it at that and form your own opinion on Servant. But yeah, it's very, very enjoyable. And Servant is a M. Night Shyamalan type show. He was a producer. He's directed a number of episodes. So speaking of M. Night Shyamalan, Kelly and I also watched Knock at the Cabin. And Knock at the Cabin was based off of the book Cabin at the End of the World. And so it wasn't a script that M. Night Shyamalan wrote, but it's a movie he made. And overall, that movie, it's okay. I don't think it's by any means a bad movie whatsoever. And this is a movie that if you don't know the premise of it, basically is this gay couple with their adopted daughter. They're at a cabin in the woods for like a vacation, and the daughter ends up coming upon this stranger who's played by Dave Bautista, and he's just talking to her for a little bit. And so it establishes that he's like this guy. He's like, I'm really sorry for like what's going to happen to you today. And so she gets kind of spooked. She goes back to the cabin where her two dads are staying at, and tells him like there's this man, and then there's, a knock on the door, and it's Dave Bautista's character. I think his name was Leonard, and he's just saying like, hey, maybe we come in, maybe we talk to you for, a bit. And so they're continuing, both dads are a little bit sketched out by this. And then so Leonard and three other people break into this cabin and then present them with this thing saying, you have to sacrifice one of you people in order to save the world because the world is coming to an end. And, interesting premise for sure. But the way it plays out, I wasn't mad about the way the movie plays out or anything, but it was pretty easy to call what the symbolism behind this movie was. And if you know anything biblical wise, you will pretty much see what's coming in this movie. That's all I'll say. But yeah, the way it wraps up, in a way, it's trying to say were these people really right about, they had this family had to sacrifice one of the people in order to save the world, or these people were just crazy. They were crazy religious nuts, and the world wasn't coming to an end. But throughout the movie, they turn on the TV, and there's these certain news stories that they had been able to predict, basically. And it makes you do think maybe these people aren't crazy, maybe they really are telling the truth about this. But apparently the difference between the book and the movie is there's one certain event that happens in both the movie and the book, but with the movie it's kind of blown up a bit more than what happens in the book. So I think that kind of gives away the clear answer, at least to me. And yeah, the way the movie wraps up, it's absolutely fine. And I think if I read the book, I probably would have enjoyed it way more than the movie. The book sounds way better, and most of the case it is usually better than the movie. But this is one of those stories that, while I love movies, knowing this premise, I wish I had read the book rather than seen the movie. And that's not to say that the movie is bad. There's good performances across the board from everyone involved in this movie. It's just one of those movies that when it does wrap up, it's kind of that was enjoyable. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad, but it's not something I would probably ever watch again. So I'm just going to leave Knock at the Cabin? I was about to say Cabin in the Woods. And with that Cabin in the Woods is a great movie, but yeah, Knock at the Cabin. I would just say most people who watch it will probably enjoy it, at least most 2/3 of it. But I would just watch it to form your own opinion. But this is a movie that I will probably never watch again. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Everyone involved did a good job, and it's definitely not among the worst of M. Night Shyamalan, and it's not among the best of his. It's just right in the middle. And so if you look at the ratings on like Rotten Tomatoes, I think both the critics and audience score is like around a 60%, and that is the perfect way to describe it. Is like, it's not great, it's not bad. I'll leave it at that. So enough about M. Night Shyamalan. He was mostly pretty closely in like the topic of today's horror vlog. But moving on, I started watching this one show called, it was made in 2004, and it was a British show called Garth Marenghi's Darkplace. And I had watched the first episode of this show quite a number of years ago. I never finished the series, but I'm going to try my best to explain the premise of this show to you as best as I can. And it's going to sound very convoluted. And believe me, it is very convoluted. I think even the show is even more bonkers than how I'm going to describe it to you. But pretty much Garth Marenghi's Darkplace is about an author named Garth Marenghi, and it is made almost like a documentary type style, or people call it a mockumentary. It is a mockumentary type style of a show where Garth Marenghi's talking about him being a horror writer, and that he had done a show in the 80s called Garth Marenghi's Darkplace. And in this show, he talks about the show that he did in the 80s, and he thinks that the show was so ahead of its time. And then it shows, actually each episode shows an episode of the show, so it's a show within a show. And so it starts off in the mockumentary type style, then it goes to play the show, an episode of the show in the show, and then after that episode wraps up, then it goes back to the mockumentary style for Garth Marenghi to basically wrap up the end of the episode. And yeah, it's as bonkers as it sounds. But it is a comedy. Like, obviously it sounds so out there, you're like, this has to be like a joke. And yeah, it is a comedy, but there are a lot of horror aspects in the show. And I can't help but get a lot of H.P. Lovecraft vibes just based off of the character of Garth Marenghi being a horror writer. And so the premise of the TV show in the show, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, is like Garth Marenghi plays this doctor, and it involves these other doctors that work in this hospital. And it reminds me, a lot of like, if you've read any H.P. Lovecraft, there's like the famous thing that Batman, like in the Batman comics and shows and movies and everything, there's Arkham Asylum, which is most famous for having the Joker. And Arkham Asylum is a nod to H.P. Lovecraft because Arkham is a made-up place. It's not a real place. And so in the show within the show, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace is, a bunch of doctors work in this hospital, and a lot of just bonkers things happen. Like the first episode is like a guy literally explodes, his entire body explodes, but yet his head is like laying on the floor. There's blood everywhere, and he's like saying to Garth Marenghi playing the doctor, he's like, I think I'm gonna die. And it's like, dude, you're in pieces, you should be dead. And there's an episode that's about like one of the female doctors like goes absolutely insane and is causing all this chaos amongst the hospital. And like one episode's about this person gives birth to like this eyeball monster, and it has like its connection to the main character doctor who is played by Garth Marenghi. Is like, he had a son who was like practically just a creature, and he lost his son, so he develops a bond with this eyeball creature and is trying to keep it secret from everybody. And it's just a lot of horror aspects to it, to a really funny show. And one of my favorite movies is Reanimator. That was from the 80s. And like, Reanimator in itself is a horror movie, but it has a lot of funny aspects to it and it makes you laugh. And to me, this was like, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace is pretty much if you took the premise of Reanimator but made it a straight up comedy. And that it reminds me so much of Reanimator, which is funny too because there's a lot of H.P. Lovecraft type nods in this show, and Reanimator is originally a story by H.P. Lovecraft, so you can't help but notice all the connections. But this show is absolutely bonkers, and if you need something that is way off the beaten path, very, very out there, I recommend Garth Marenghi's Darkplace. And this actually has some famous British actors that are in like pretty popular shows now. Like it has Richard Ayoade, and he is most famous for being in the show The IT Crowd as Moss. And you also have Matt Berry, who is most famous, I think, now from the show that's currently airing, What We Do in the Shadows. And so both of them are in it, and they are very, very funny in it. So I, have no doubt, like, I started watching What We Do in the Shadows, and Matt Berry is like my favorite aspect of that show, at least the episodes I've seen. And yeah, like Richard Ayoade is also hilarious. The guy who plays Garth Marenghi, I have not really seen him in anything else, but he does an amazing job. You would think he's just a pro actor at this point, and him as the main character, Garth Marenghi, is hilarious. And yeah, it's so hard to describe the show. It's just something you have to watch, basically. So I give it my personal recommendation, and obviously it's not for everybody. Like, some people are going to be like, what the hell am I watching? Most moments in this show, you're going to go, what the F? Like, probably every 30 seconds. But I love every aspect of it. It's really funny, and yeah. So if you like stuff that's way off the beaten path and out there, that is the show for you. So getting to my final thing of this episode of Brett's Horror Vlog, it is not anything really horror related, but it is music wise, and that is Metallica's new record, 72 Seasons, came out on April 14th, and I got a copy here, and I recently listened to it, and I have to say, I know Metallica doesn't put out a new record, they usually go a long time without putting out new records, and this was the case, I think, it was 8 years from Death Magnetic when that record came out. I think it was 2008, and then 8 years later they put out Hardwired to Self-Destruct in 2016, and then this one, 72 Seasons, is 2023. So that's like 8 or 9 years since their previous record. They really like to jam-pack their albums with a lot of material, at least the past couple of releases. So yeah, this album is 77 minutes long, and my first off the bat, like, listening to this album is they could have cut some stuff out. And I know that probably because of how long they go without releasing albums, they feel like they need to really give people a lot of material to be able to listen to. To me, this album didn't need to be 77 minutes long. It was very, very, very long, and it gets to a point where the album is very jarring to listen to. It'd be one thing, not that I'm a fan of ballads like all that much, but there needed to be certain songs that kind of broke up the monotony of all the distortion, all the crunch, and all the heaviness in this record, because it's just 77 minutes of crunch. You have your fast songs, you have your mid-tempo songs. There are really no ballads, though, on this record, which normally isn't a complaint, but I like, if you're going to have a long record, have some ebb and flow to it. That being said, there are some definite highlights on this record. I'll just show, you have this typical slip disc cover of, the album cover, but, opening this up, a lot of people don't have physical media nowadays, so I guess I'll just show that off, but, the way it folds out is kind of cool. So you have James, of course, you have Lars, you have Kirk, and then you have Robert. And then this all folds out in 4 ways. Of course, you have a booklet of lyrics, which is hard to come by nowadays as well, because a lot of times if you still buy physical media, a lot of times they don't have lyrics, in the booklets. But I do have an appreciation for physical media. I left the CD in my stereo. Whoops. But yeah, that's what the inside looks like. You know, you have a globe, you have headphones, you have a little record player. It's pretty cool. But yeah, in case you don't know, the reason for the name of the record, 72 Seasons, that's how long they've been a band. And I'm folding this down the wrong way. But yeah, pretty much it's, 77 minutes. And, you know, it does have, some songs are very, very long. The final track of the album is about like 11 minutes long. But I would say this record is at its best when they're playing fast songs. Like, I would say the record does start off pretty good in the beginning. Like, it starts off pretty strong, I would say. You know, you have the title track, 72 Seasons first. Shadows follow after that. And then, 72 Seasons. You have Shadows follow, and then Screaming Suicide, which is the first single they put out after they put out Lux Eterna. And, you know, Screaming Suicide's good. And, you know, once it starts hitting the mid-tempo songs, that's where I started losing interest, or that's where the record started suffering. And, I mean, when saying that, I don't know if they put out, you know, like just a really fast record, a fast thrash record, if that would have still been, like, better. But at least Sleepwalk My Life Away, I didn't really care for. And then, it's like once it hits those mid-tempo songs, the record really suffers for me, because especially the mid-tempo songs, like, they are very long. And most of Metallica, you know, if you're very familiar with Metallica, is they have long intros. Like, most of their songs are pretty dang long. And this is not the, you know, this is the case here with 72 Seasons. Like, it is a long record, and each song is pretty long. Like, it's like each song is like a minimum of 5 minutes long. The shortest song on the record is the first single they put out, Lux Eterna, which to me is still one of the best songs on the record. I mean, and it sucks saying that, because normally it's like, I don't want to say that the hit single from the record is one of the best songs, but yeah, Lux Eterna is just, it's a solid track. Like, mine is like the kind of noodling solo from Kirk Hammett. I think he could have written a better solo for that song. Like, that song's 3.5 minutes, and it's solid. It gives you such like old school Motorhead, like heavy metal vibes, and I love it because it also sounds like Hit the Lights, which is also another great track of theirs, and that song's like 4 minutes. And so to me, there's a lot of aspects of songs that did need to be cut down. Like, they could have trimmed the fat a good bit on some of these songs. And because by the time I reached like track 7, track 8, I was starting to get a little bit bored of the record. And especially that was the case with a lot of the mid-tempo songs. But yeah, first 3 tracks I thought were really enjoyable. Lux Eterna was a great track. Unfortunately, this is not a record I feel like I'm going to come back to a lot, because it felt kind of like a chore. It got to a point where, it was hard to just like sit through like the rest of it. And, you know, you're asking a lot of your listeners to listen to 77 minutes of a record. And it'd be one thing if, you know, there were a couple, like 1 or 2 maybe ballads or at least softer songs. Because I think if you had some of these longer songs, if you had broke up, like, you know, you cut the distortion, there was parts with like clean guitars and stuff. You know, like when you think of like Master of Puppets, for example, is like that song's 8 minutes long. And it's like, and it's not just, you know, the main riff or that main tempo of the whole song. You know, there's a cut in the song where the song, you know, tempo slows down a lot, and then you have like the clean guitar, and then leading into a solo section in that slow tempo part. I think if you had a little more of that on this record, it would have been more solid. And I feel bad kind of saying that, because I know how much work goes into making a record, and especially with this, they probably had a lot of fun doing it. But to me, this is like not a bad record, but it's not that good either. Like there is highlight songs there's songs from this record I'm definitely going to go back and listen to, but the record as a whole, I'm probably going to be skipping a lot of the mid-tempo stuff. So unfortunately, I can't really say it's like, to me, this is like a 6 out of 10, honestly. It's not like the worst thing ever. It's no Saint Anger, obviously, but yeah, this is a record I'm gonna put the CD in, you know, and I'll play the first couple tracks, but then I'll be skipping like every other song, honestly. So that is a shame, you know, for going that long without putting out new music. But yeah, that and Lars's drumming. Like Lars just needs to learn how to take drum lessons, or just needs to, you know, swallow his pride and just step up his game a little bit. Anyways, like, I'm glad they're still putting out music. I mean, Metallica's been going pretty strong for a long time, but yeah, it's a shame, like, because, I mean, I would say actually this is a better record than Hardwired to Self-Destruct as a whole. And that's the thing with Hardwired. Like, Hardwired was a album that had some definite highlights on it, but a lot of it just felt like filler. And a lot of it feels like filler to me on this. And there's a lot of sections, like, I'm kind of running in circles with what I'm saying here, but there's just a lot of sections. I was like, you guys really could have trimmed the fat on that. Like, I don't know why you just kept all that in there. And this would have been a good thing to have, like, a 77-minute album if, you know, you put out a regular version and then you put out a deluxe version where you're like, hey, here's a lot more tracks, you know, if you wanted a longer experience for the, you know, the album. But yeah, like, if they cut this down to like 9 songs, I think it would have been a lot more solid and a lot more easier to sit through. But yeah, and it's like, you know, speaking of, like, the final song on your record is 11 minutes. So it's like, you could have cut some other songs out, but that's just me. Anyways, I would just check it out regardless. Like, go on Spotify or whatever streaming platform you have and give it a listen. You know, you could be like, Brett, you're full of beans. This was a great record. That's awesome, because, you know, I'm glad you enjoyed it a lot more than I did, but I am a fan, so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna break down and just buy the CD. But anyways, I've talked entirely too long for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed this video, me talking horror, talking heavy metal, talking a bunch of nonsense. So if you enjoyed it, give me that thumbs up, kick that subscribe button, I don't know what I'm saying, and then stab that notification bell so you can get notified for newer videos of ours. And my name is Brett. I appreciate you watching to the end. You are a saint if you did, and I will see you in a future video. Bye.